Last Thursday, we noted that Lenten season is the most important season of the liturgical calendar of the Catholic Church because it is during this season that we learn how to suffer. We have seen the importance of suffering as being the handmaid of the Catholic Church. It's the heart of the Catholic Church. When there is no suffering, the Church dies. And the same thing with each one of us. When we have no suffering, our spiritual souls also dies. The reason for this is that suffering is what removes vices from our souls. Vices are the sources of sin. So if you do not have the vices because of your suffering, then you would not have any sin. And the symbol of the Lenten season is the cross. We must suffer like Christ, not like bad man, but like Christ. And the crucifix had always been a sign of contradiction. In any contradiction, there are two sides. One comes from the world, which is always an act of suffering on the person, and the other is a grace from God. The suffering comes from the persecution of the world. The grace comes from God who sustains us. In the life of Jesus Christ, even if it is described in detail in sacred scripture, there is one thing that is not mentioned at all, and that is, how did Christ sustain himself to provide for his needs? There is nothing, absolutely nothing in scriptures. One thing is certain, that Christ and the apostles had a common fund, and almost for certain Christ had some savings that came from Mary and Joseph. But on the whole, Christ was living a very poor life. And this is the reason why people found him contemptible. Because it seems to be natural in men to look up to people who have a rich way of life, rich style, and rich way of doing things. And Christ did not have this style, and therefore he was an object of contempt. Today, our picture of Jesus Christ is quite erroneous. That is why in our first vignettes, we emphasize the fact and the importance that we should know the true Christ. For us today, the picture of Christ is devoid of all poverty. You will never find a picture of Christ in a manger that is smelly or dirty. You will never see a speck of dirt or tear or darn in the clothing of the apostles, though during that time they were nothing but poor travelers. Let us look at Palm Sunday. Today our concept of Palm Sunday was a spectacular scenario. But the truth is that during Palm Sunday, Christ looked more like a tired man sitting on an ass, surrounded by skinny bodyguards, with a mob around him of unwashed pilgrims shouting, Hosanna. Now this is truly Palm Sunday. And the reason Palm Sunday was really like this was because Christ found it fitting to make it look like that. He wanted to make it look like that. How come? Because otherwise we are going to miss completely the message he was trying to tell us. Imagine if Palm Sunday you see mobs of people dressed in silk, with a grand choir singing Hosanna in 5 voices, and people waving roses. I think we would have completely missed the message of Christ. And the message of Christ is quite clear, that He was God, He was rich, but He became poor for our sake. Christ was poor, His church must be poor, and His followers must be poor. And true enough, in the beginning of the Catholic Church, all her members were poor. They were peasants, farmers, fishermen. Now, the word poor in Greek has two meanings. First, dishonorable poverty or honorable poverty. Now, the word dishonorable poverty appears 34 times in scriptures, while honorable poverty appears only once. Now, this dishonorable poverty is similar to the poverty wherein you find people asking you for 50 pesos for a cup of coffee. It is the most common kind. But the honorable poverty was exhibited by St. Paul, and only once in scriptures. And that was the time when every time he would give a homily, he would remind his hearers of the Sunday collection. The collection for the new converts, the collection for the poor church in Jerusalem. And the reason of St. Paul was very clear. I have given you spiritual treasures. Can't you spare a few penny? Our churches truly, and here, are poor. We consider ornaments which look cheap. Their architecture is weird. And every time you hear Mass, somebody passes around with a basket in front of you as if we have to pay admission in order to hear Mass. Now, this really is poor, but this is not the poverty of Christ that we are trying to present to you. The poverty of Christ, true poverty, is a Catholic instinct by which we distrust money as the root of all evil. It is that instinct that tells us to be detached from all worldly things. It is in fact a teaching of Jesus Christ that we must practice poverty. We must love and preach poverty. And not only that, we are supposed to embrace voluntary poverty even if we have much. Saint Francis of Assisi loved poverty because all saints love poverty. We who are not saints are fearful of poverty. That is why we have been working so hard to earn so much. We fear poverty so much. But for Saint Francis, Lady Poverty is someone to have fun with and play with. In fact, poverty is the bride of all religious. Christian poverty has these different effects on the soul. First of all, it removes from our minds all solicitude over worldly things. This is precisely what makes people depressed when they are too much involved with the business of the world. But poverty removes all of these. Besides, poverty is also a supreme act of humiliation. It is voluntary poverty and it is voluntary humiliation. Because the moment all pride has been removed from us, there is nothing in us to get hurt, because usually it's our pride that is hurt. But without pride, who can hurt us? Poverty is so useful because it means not knowing where your next meal would come from, which develops in you complete dependence on God. And who is the most trustworthy person we can depend on? Is it not God Himself? But the deeper reason why we must practice Christian poverty is because we want to imitate Christ. And Christ did one solitary act. He was God, but He stripped Himself of divinity to save us. If Christ could strip Himself of divinity, can't we strip ourselves of perishable goods? All Christians are called to detachment. Detachment meaning to say you should not cling with the things of the world and try to put some distance between you and the things of the world. All Christians should practice this, but very few are called to the heights of poverty. We Catholics are the poorest in the whole world, but we enrich people with our poverty. Look at most of the convents. They are poor, but inside those convents are prayers that are rising to heaven daily, that we may be enriched by the graces that God bestows on man because of those prayers. These convents with suffering souls inside are like wealthy financiers, but they're engaged in a currency that the world has never even dreamt of. This currency are suffering souls that brings unto us and enrich us with the divine blessings. The next sign of contradiction that the cross teaches us, which should appear on His church and on His true followers, is chastised but not killed. We Catholics, or true Christians, have chosen a very unpopular cause. It is a cause that invites from all around us hatred and murderous instinct. Christ earned those hatred, His church have earned those hatred, and we, in proportion to our being like Christ, will experience this hatred. But Christ had the power to free Himself, because even if people hated Him, they couldn't touch Him. Christ was going to live, to suffer, and to die on His own terms, not on the terms of man. And we, therefore, with His church, will always suffer, be persecuted, hatred, and even die at the choosing of God, and not at the choosing of ordinary man. It is said that when his townsmate wanted to kill Christ by bringing Him to the brow of a hill, He just walked in their midst and disappeared. It was not His time. See how Christ from the very beginning was hated, and plans to murder Him was always in the offing. He has not yet preached, He has not even grown up, and Herod wanted Him dead. When He was talking to his townsmates, they wanted Him killed. And not only that, when He was preaching the way to heaven, the Judeans were going to stone Him. To find respite and peace, Christ had to go to the outskirts of the city, in lonely places, in the desert, in mountains, because He was constantly living a way of life which was dangerous. Herod feared Him so much, so Herod wanted Him dead. The Jewish priesthood hated Him, so they also wanted Him dead. The Galileans took offense at everything that He said, so they wanted Him permanently silenced. Christ was persecuted, tortured, and crucified, but in his own time and in his own choosing. His enemies had nothing to do with the choosing of the time and the place. It was Christ's own choosing. And so the same thing with his church and his followers. They will be persecuted and hated and tortured and killed, but on God's time and God's choosing. And this is what baffles our enemies, that it seems that though they seem to be successful in hating and persecuting the church, it seems that it was God's plan that they were following. Christ says, "Fear not." You see, the church is like a boat in the middle of the sea amidst the storm. The storm, and the wind are the chastisement that Christ sends the church in order to test the church. So the chastisement is not the victory of the evil one. It is precisely sent by Christ to test the faith of his followers. So every time the church finds herself in the midst of the storm, you will notice that Christ would first rebuke their faith and only after still the storm. "Why, you of little faith?" Showing the apostles that they were failing the test and that Christ would still the storm. And so every time we are chastised, keep in mind that we are being tested by God. We should never think that when God chastises us, he has deserted us. No. And this is a lesson that all Catholics and the Catholic Church should learn, that when God puts us in the middle of a stormy sea, it is in order to test us, or more especially, to increase our faith. During the 3 centuries of the Catholic Church, she was buffeted from outside and from within. From outside, she was ruthlessly repressed by pagans, by barbarians, and from within, she was ruthlessly destroyed by heresies and apostasies and schisms. In France, for instance, the famous French Revolution was the consequence of an apostasy within the Catholic Church, which nearly erased the Catholic Church from France. And so the little French Catholics that were left were crying out, "Lord, don't you care that we perish?" And his answer is always the same, "O you of little faith." All through the centuries, the Catholic Church had always been almost at the point of extinction, but she always rises up more vigorous than ever. It's suffering that makes the church strong. The Jesuit order, for instance, there was a time that she was erased from the face of the earth by men of the church. They were dissolved by a pope who was pressured by a Catholic king, and they really nearly disappeared from the face of the earth. It was an order that was greatly chastised, but when they recovered, they were a stronger force in the service of the church. The Jesuits are a best example of one who is chastised but not killed. They really underwent great chastisement from the very men of the church and from Catholic kings, but they were never killed. They are truly a sign of contradiction like their Master Christ, and therefore truly the followers of Christ. The next sign of contradiction is dying, but behold, we live. So the contradiction is that one is dying and yet he lives. When Christ was on earth, it was very obvious that he was in a hurry. He was living a short life, 33 years, with 3 years preaching. So he was in a hurry to do things. And he was also in a hurry when he was demanding things from the Jews. He had a sense of urgency, to the point that it is said that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the Sabbath. Rested on the Sabbath. But when Christ came to earth to work, he even worked during the Sabbath. Christ says, I must work while it is day, because when the night comes, no man can work. And so Christ really worked so hard because he knew very well that he was a dying man. The shadow of the cross was always over him, so he had to accomplish everything before he dies. Well, of course, this is a way of speaking, humanly speaking, because he was God, he could do things otherwise, but remember that Christ was showing us an example and teaching us by an example. In the way he did it, which we must imitate, is that you must work and waste no time, because we are all dying men. Imagine an artist who knows very well that he is going to die soon, and he wants to finish a masterpiece. Will this artist waste time? Of course not. He will work so hard to finish the masterpiece because he is a dying man, working under the shadow of death. And so Christ, if we look at him, was supposed to save the whole world. That is the masterpiece of Jesus Christ. And he knew he had to finish it in a matter of a short time. And therefore Christ, like an artist who is dying, worked so hard because he was a dying man. Christ always lived like a man who was dying, and we also have to live in a similar way, because truly we can die anytime. A life of rest, leisure, vacation, good time, traveling around has no place in the life of a dying man, and doing nothing also has no place in the life of a dying man. We have to finish our masterpiece before we die, and that masterpiece is our souls. When the Pharisees saw Jesus Christ working so hard, they said, "He won't last. He will wear himself out." That's the reason why they did not plan to kill him earlier, because with his activity, exhausting activity, they were hoping that he would just drop dead with a heart attack. He was fasting, praying the whole night, preaching the whole day. He was really working so hard because he knew he was a dying man. When Christ died, everybody thought that it was the end. But even before they can finish saying he is dead, he had risen from the dead. And the same thing with the Catholic Church. When Christ ascended into heaven, they had no founder. They were led by uneducated men and had no funds. Everybody thought the Catholic Church would die. But again, even before they finished their sentence, the Catholic Church had converted the whole of Europe. The cross has a very simple message, but a very difficult one. That is why even Catholics reject the doctrine of the cross. This last sign of contradiction can be summarized in the words of Thomas à Kempis in his famous book, The Following of Christ. He writes, "We have to live a dying life, a life with a constant thought of our death bed. This will give us a contempt and develop such a way of looking at the world that we consider it meaningless and useless. And it gives us a sense of urgency and haste because our time is short." St. Paul describes the life of a saint in these words, "Dead to the world, but with his life hidden in God. As dying and behold, we live. It is only in proportion as we are dead to the world that we live in Christ." God bless you.